know, if your house has been foreclosed, it'll come and get you. And you'll get 1099 on whatever you've gotten written off in credit card
You know,
debt.
the tragedy of it is, if we really had a viable government, an executive order would have been signed long ago, immediately freezing all foreclosures.
No, I'm sorry, I have to disagree. The tragedy of it is that we have an uninformed populace.
Which could have demanded that.
And, well, an informed, educated populace would take matters into their own hand and wouldn't rely on government to do anything
Good for you. Amen. Be right back with George and Cliff after this. Okay, and we're back. I'm Jeff Rense. Glad you're along tonight. George and Cliff are here for their second visit, and we're going to have them on fairly regularly as we walk through this year of manifestation. And remember, they've been tracking some of the things that we are all going to go through, and in fact are going through for years. Okay, gentlemen, where would you like to step next?
Well, there's the things that are of somewhat concern to me, as I was saying, the biospheric degradation. You kind of put the issue of long.
Talking about the destruction of the planet here is what you're talking about.
Our environment for life of all forms on our planet and within the solar system, correct. And when you think about things at that level, you tend to say, well, 401k plans aren't that important, really. Yeah, it's very meaningful, and it's in an immediacy kind of a way, but anymore, the distance between immediacy and long-term may be shading. We're running into situations as of today where we're having extraordinary weather here in the West Coast, record-setting. We've had a really nasty winter on the northeast, and we're finding out that the jet stream is shifting. And
I just put that story up. I don't know if you saw it earlier today or not. I just got it about an hour and a half ago. Let me tell our listeners real quick what you're talking about, because it is a very important development. The jet stream that we rely on to bring our weather, especially to the southern parts of the United States, is now shifting generally to the north, which means the moisture track, the storm fronts, are going to be pushed further north.
And this is key, it turns out. If you want a really good, quick education on the subject, go and get Lovelock's book called Revenge of Gaia, in which he discusses the mechanism by which air flows around the planet, and such places as the Amazon produce these upward air streams of very hot, dense, moisture-laden air, which dry out as they reach the upper layers of the atmosphere, where moisture just simply can't hang around and thus falls back down as rain. But that dry air used to go to the southwest of the U.S. and cause desertification, as well as in Mexico, and the Sahara is the result of desertification caused by the downward stream of dry air, which is generated further south from it in Africa.
Uh-huh.
If the jet stream moves north, now we might find deserts in Berlin, and we might find that it becomes extremely intolerable to be able for plants to grow in what used to be the breadbasket of the U.S. There's a real curious thing that most people are unaware of, even master gardeners, and that's called the nitrogen cycle and its limitations on the production of food. If the soil gets much beyond 121 degrees, the ability of all kinds of food crop plants to deal with nitrogen, to accept it and combine it with other materials, fails. And by the time it reaches 130 degrees, it's essentially failed. There are a few plant species that can do okay beyond that, but very few. So even if it becomes tolerable and you're sitting there in your air-conditioned splendor, your plants aren't going to do so well. And since we basically depend on plants to live, evidence the recent wheat prices and rice and so on, and now there's laws popping up about the exporting of rice and other grains.
Right.
So there's a whole lot of governments that are also very concerned with this shift in the airflow.
Now, there may be some good news, though, because one of the things in the longer-term values has I don't think it's been completely fulfilled yet, and that's the whole matter of the Southwest becoming wet. Now, how does that figure in?
Well, okay, and you're correct, George, but that's flooded. Remember, it's not only wet, but perhaps permanently so, as though maybe a giant inland sea or something. We're just not sure. And we also don't know, we don't have much of a timeline progression on that, say, as differentiated from the global coastal event. This is this global coastal event thing is perhaps a misnomer, because it may be underway now, the way that there's these giant 9/0 earthquakes happening in the Northwest. They just take 6 or 8 months to work themselves out. I don't know how many people are familiar with that, but it is true. It does occur. I actually have personal experience in the sense of cracking foundation from some of these 9/0 earthquakes that they just stretch out ever so long. And we're in a current situation where we're finding rising sea levels globally, not being reported in mainstream media, and some of the rising sea levels are eating up beaches on the order of several hundred feet. So I have subscribers, for instance, in northern India and Portugal and other areas of the planet that are reporting that, geez, my favorite restaurant had to move 300 feet back up the beach because it's now almost in the water. And only 2 years ago, it was 165 feet up from the high tide. And yet now, merely 10 inches of water in that particular latitude has caused all these businesses to have to relocate. And this is occurring globally. At the same time, we see that the scientists are coming back from Antarctica and reporting that 1,000 miles out from Antarctica, the salinity is changing at some very great deep levels, relatively, of the top of the ocean. And this is quite alarming. It means enough fresh water is pouring out of Antarctica to change the salt content in one of the most stable seas on the planet, and at some great distance. We're not talking a few miles out from the continent. We're talking thousands of miles out in intermixed currents. And these scientists are on the order of rather freaked about it. You don't see them saying much, even in the global media stream anymore, because they're being suppressed by the people that pay their salaries. But again, that goes back to the invisible hand, and what they're really scared of is the degradation of the biosphere at such a level that the rest of us just don't care about their control structures, such as money, the deeded land, etc., and we all start going walkabout in a form of survival that hasn't been seen since
that's
Genghis Khan and the hordes.
That's very interesting, and you may have just spelled out for our listeners the only viable means at which these bastards can be decertified: survival. All of a sudden, we don't care what they do. We're going to save our lives, and they're second.
Remember about 6 months ago, Jeff, or was it 8 months back, the administration came out with internal edicts that basically put a gag on all the scientists. Anything now that comes out about the environment essentially has to go through the political apparatchik rather than just coming out in scientific fora.
Yeah, it's national security. Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
Homeland Security
that's
has
right.
control of it all.
Right.
They're not alone, and we find this with the Chinese, for instance. It's no accident that the Chinese are heavily invested in northern Africa, currently where the Sahara is. They have very good information, as do many aware observers, that soon the Sahara will be vast areas of grassland as the jet stream jumps over them and makes northern Europe, or middle Europe, into this giant desert area that seems to want to join across the Urals into the Mongolian region.
Are you calling for that too, the jet stream to rebirth the Sahara?
It's not the jet stream per se, but yes, that's basically that mechanism, and it's already occurring. Again, I'm coastal dwelling in a sense that I live near Puget Sound, which is an inland body of water, and I'm not that very far up off of the water. And our particular terrain doesn't have much in the way of lowlands to absorb great tidal influxes, and that's my personal concern, because we're getting the indication that perhaps as early as the end of the first quarter of 2009, we'll see some form of global coastal event that may be a precursor to a much larger event in 2010. And the only thing that, when we go in, we look at the linguistics.
You said global coastal event. That means all coasts.
Correct.
Right.
All coasts everywhere will experience, perhaps over as little as a single day, but much more likely over the course of a month or a few weeks, probably a rather shocking level of tidal increase, to the point where certain things may be disrupted. We don't know what level of tidal increase.
Yeah.
It could be very little and still cause enough verbiage to hit the media. So we have to be somewhat careful. It's not like we're saying there's going to be a 100-foot tidal wave that rushes around and crushes everything in the coast. It's not a Godzilla kind of scenario. It can be as little as 14 or 15 inches, yet it may cause the disruption of oil flows for countries.
Exactly.
It may drown Bangladesh. You know, there are a lot of these lowland.
Could change everything.
Correct. And so it can be catastrophic without necessarily being overly dramatic. However, the data seems to suggest that whatever our first issue with the global coastal event is, it will be replicated in a much larger extent sometime in 2010, 2011. And the only thing we can think of at that point is that, well, we're getting indications now that we've passed the ability of the glaciers to reform themselves. In spite of the seeming evidence to the snowpack in the eastern Antarctic glacier, we've passed the magic 2.5 degrees centigrade, and thus we have the Greenland glacier melting irretrievably, and we have the Antarctic glacier melting irretrievably. It's only a question of how long. What a lot of the scientists don't appear to understand is that the tipping point event, or the tipping point math, seems to apply not only to populaces, or large populations of humans, or flocks of birds, for instance. All the birds are flying along. There might be 10,000 of them, and all of a